bell rang, and Charlie and I got up and made our way to our first lesson, which was PE. It was my favourite subject, and Charlie's worst. I'd missed a lot of sports lessons this term for mucking about, but in the last couple of weeks, I'd been allowed back in the class again. Mrs. Allen, the teacher, had started teaching us how to play tennis, and we all stood around her on the multi-surface pitch with our rackets ready. I kept spinning mine on its head, and she gave me a stern look. So I stopped. Remember what we learnt last week, 8A? The key to holding your racket correctly is to feel like you are shaking someone's hand, Mrs. Allen said. Now get into pairs, hold the racket out for your partner, and let them find the correct grip. I could see Charlie making his way towards me. We always stuck together in PE because, basically, no one else wanted to be with either of us. I messed around too much and Charlie was just useless. He couldn't even catch a ball. He grinned at me and held out the racket for me to shake. I was getting fed up being stuck with him all the time. He was such a donut. I snatched the racket off him. Ow! No need to be so rough, Maxwell, he said, rubbing his hand. Now hold out yours. I huffed and pointed the racket handle towards him, but every time he went to take it, I moved it away. His reflexes were so slow. There was no way he was going to get hold of it. Oh, now, come on, Maxwell, he said, laughing. I kept moving the racket so it was just out of his reach. He frowned and tried to second guess which way I was going to go, but he was wrong every single time. Are you trying to work out a scientific calculation, Charlie? I said as I darted the racket left and right. Come on, there must be some formula or something that you can compute in that big brain of yours. Charlie wasn't laughing anymore, and his face was running with sweat. He was snorting through his nose, his eyes fixed on the racket handle. That's enough, Maxwell, shouted Mrs. Allen from across the court. I paused for a moment, but I started again as soon as she'd turn around. Come on, Charlie, you can do it, said a girl called Amy Branford. A few others saw something was going on and wandered over. I kept darting the racket from side to side, up and down, and Charlie failed to grab it every time. Concentrate, said Marcus Grundy. Try and work out which way he's going to go. Charlie stopped for a moment and looked at him. Marcus Grundy was giving him advice? I couldn't believe it either. Well, go on then, said Marcus, chewing on the side of his thumb. Charlie went to grab the racket, and I quickly moved it again. Oh, you nearly got it, squealed Tabitha Wright. Everyone was watching. Mrs. Allen was busy moving a basket of balls over to the opposite end of the course. Someone began a slow hand clap, and the others joined in. Charlie! 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 I could see Mrs. Allen turn and start making her way over with her hands on her hips. Come on, you can do it. Just grab it, Charlie. Don't let him beat you. I couldn't believe it. They were all on his side. What is going on here? Boomed Mrs. Allen, and the chanting fizzled out. I turned around and Charlie reached for the racket and yanked it out of my hand. The crowd went crazy, cheering and clapping. But I'd stopped, I shouted. He didn't get it fairly. He just grabbed it when I stopped. Face it, Maxwell, you're a loser, said Marcus, inches from my face. Yeah, he won it fair and square, said Sanjeev. A few of the kids were doing the L on the forehead thing at me. Charlie was grinning, clutching his racket to his chest as everyone applauded and patted him on the back. That didn't count, I yelled again. I went to take the racket off him, but he was hugging it like a precious teddy bear. Let go, Charlie, and we can have another go, yeah? Best of three? I said. I didn't want to be humiliated, especially by him. That's enough now, said Mrs. Allen, but I kept wrestling. I said that's enough. Everyone get back into your pairs. Charlie's hands were gripped tightly around the racket, and I tried to prise his fingers off one by one. Get off me, he said. Maxwell Beckett, if you don't leave Charlie alone at this very minute, you'll be getting the biggest negative points you can possibly imagine. I looked round at Mrs. Allen. Her eyes were bulging and her nostrils were flared. Everyone was silent, waiting to see what I'd do next. I could hear Charlie sniffling behind me. Mrs. Allen walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. Come on, Charlie. Let's get you paired up with someone else, shall we? I couldn't believe it. I'd even lost Charlie as a partner. Everyone was looking at me with disgust in their eyes. Mrs. Allen put Charlie with Kelly Mattison and Tabitha Wright. Kelly put her arm around him and whispered something which made him laugh. I tried to look casual about it, but there was clearly no one left to pair up with me. As they all started shaking hands with their rackets again, I walked towards the big basket on long legs and gave it a great big kick. The basket came crashing down and hundreds of yellow tennis balls cascaded out around and bounced around the court. Maxwell Beckett, pick those all up right now, screamed Mrs. Allen. I huffed and chuffed, slowly walked towards the balls that were rolling around. At least it gave me something to do now that I didn't have a partner. Okay, everyone, said Mrs. Allen. I want you to grab a ball and practice bouncing it up and down on your racket like so. Mrs. Allen demonstrated, and then everyone rushed over and grabbed a ball from the floor. I looked over at Charlie and watched him. He couldn't even keep the ball on the flat racket, let alone hit it up and down. If he'd been partnered with me, I'd have got frustrated and shouted at him to do it properly. Now he was surrounded by the rest of the class, who suddenly thought he was brilliant. He looked like he was having a great time. Maxwell, come on, those balls aren't going to put themselves in the basket, yells Mrs. Allen, as I stood there watching everyone. Charlie dropped his ball again and lumbered after it, laughing as he went. I turned away. A ball rolled towards my foot, so I bent down and crack! My head smashed against something soft. I looked up and saw Charlie's face, or rather, Charlie's hands covering his face. Ow! He cried. My nose! My nose! I put my hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I was just getting the ball, I said. Charlie's eyes peering over the top of his hands, a gush of blood pouring down his arm. Miss! Miss! Shouted Kelly. Maxwell headbutted Charlie. Mrs. Allen rushed over. I didn't mean to, I shouted. We just went for the ball at the same time. I looked back at Charlie, who was peeking over his hands at me. Charlie, tell them it was an accident. Tell them. He took his hands away from his face, his arms now crimson with blood, and then his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he fell to the floor with a great thud.